safe.
The last thing I want to be associated with is an industry that's going to be toxic or poison. It's just not that.
But others disagree.
I think the truth is that it's not an ecologically sustainable activity.
Behind the scenes in the great coal seam gas debate. Welcome to Four Corners. The CSG industry is worth many billions and growing massively, particularly down the eastern half of Australia. For cash-strapped, revenue-hungry governments, it's a welcome bonanza. But the politics are tricky. There's the promise of jobs in declining rural centres and big export dollars. But many farmers and environmentalists, not always natural allies, are not only concerned but deeply angry. The biggest concern is focused on the impact of mining on water tables and water quality, and how that in turn will affect prime agricultural land and town water. Under pressure, the New South Wales government has banned CSG activity within 2 kilometres of cities and country towns. And the federal government now plans to assess future CSG projects for their impact on water. The industry is adamant that CSG mining is safe and that new government controls will stifle growth, investment and jobs. But just how serious has government oversight of the coal seam gas industry been so far? Tonight's program features a whistleblower from inside the Queensland government process that evaluated 2 major CSG projects. She describes what sounds like a deeply flawed assessment system. The reporter is Matthew Carney.
At the head of the Murray-Darling Basin, the Condamine River is bubbling gas. It's mostly methane, and it's seeping up all over this area from the coal seams deep underground. The Condamine River runs through one of Australia's most developed coal seam gas fields in the Tara area of southern Queensland. Some see this as an alarming sign that permanent damage has been done to the structures below. The coal seam gas industry, backed by the Queensland government, says it's natural and has nothing to do with the wells that have been drilled and fracked in the area. But it started to happen in at least 3 different locations along the river. Old-timers like George Bender have never seen anything like it.
I've never seen it before.
And other farmers in the area have seen it?
A lot of, yeah, all the other farmers said they'd never seen it like that before.
So is it natural then?
Well, if it was natural, wouldn't it be there all the time?
George's property is in the heart of Australia's coal seam gas industry, which is growing at a phenomenal rate. The $50 billion industry is sinking up to 40,000 wells with a network of pipes, gathering lines and roads that crisscross the landscape. Massive holding ponds, these ones 5 kilometres long, contain water sucked from the underground. With the growth has come more evidence that Australia's greatest underground water source, the Great Artesian Basin, is being depleted and contaminated. On his 2,000 acres, George Bender grows cotton, sorghum and runs beef cattle. In 3 years, George will lose his bore water, and without water, his farm could be no more.
26, 27, 28, 29.
The Queensland Water Commission says the coal seam gas industry is the cause.
Well, there won't be any water. We won't have any stock water, and the drought comes and the surface water dries up, there won't be any water. Well, we're not the only landholders in this position. There's quite a few. Yeah, we've got 2 stock water bores in the immediate affected area.
The Water Commission has identified 85 wells that may run dry.
26063 in the balloon coal measures.
Bore 26063 and bore 83627 are on George's property.
The licence number there.
George has 3 coal seam gas wells that sit on the edge of his property. To get the gas to flow, the water in the coal seams has to be drained out first. In George's case, the water table in the coal seams under his property will drop by up to 105 metres.
They should have told us the truth in the first place, because they would have known that they were going to draw down the water in the Willoon coal measures, and that's what's upsetting to us. They didn't tell us the truth in the first place.
And you think they knew back then?
Well, common sense just tells you that it's going to happen, the way I see it anyhow.
George Bender's family have farmed on this land for 5 generations. And George and his wife Pam feel farmers are being sacrificed for a new industry which may only last a generation.
Any drawdown whatsoever in the...
I've got 5 children and they love the farm. It's hard.
You don't think they'll be able to continue, do they?
I'm scared. I'll be honest with you, I am scared. What's going to be left? Nothing. They've taken everything.
The coal seam gas companies have pledged to compensate by making good, but many farmers can't see how they can fix the water table. In the longer term, the Queensland Water Commission says another 528 bores will be affected. The drawdown will be much worse further west, predicting up to a 700-metre drop. But the industry says that's just the worst-case scenario, and more than 20,000 bores will remain unaffected while they'll fix the damaged ones.
The obligation is for those gas companies to talk with the impacted areas and make that good. That's either by deepening the bores, finding different water aquifers to deal with, and bringing and keeping the farmer whole.
They choose where they want to funnel water.
Farmers turned activist Brian Monk and his son David have 8 wells near their Tara property. They're operated by Queensland Gas Company, or QGC, which is owned by British Gas. There's also a pipeline that runs down the side of their farm.
Well, this is how you leave a permanent scar on this country, because this will never recover, ever. They've pulled all the bottom up to the surface.
Brian Monk says the coal seam gas companies have been allowed to take as much water as they want from the aquifers below and clear the native vegetation.
We're not allowed to clear it. The farmer on the other side of our boundary line here, he's not allowed to clear it. But this foreign company can actually come in here and devastate 50 metres wide, 500 odd kilometres long. Whereas genuine Australians that actually own the land are not allowed to.
Brian says the damage has already been done. The water table has been lowered, and he believes that's brought methane and poisonous chemicals like hydrogen sulfide and toluene into his bore.
This is the bore that we use basically for washing dishes, showering and cattle. Now it's absolutely useless. And you can see the gas bubbling through it.
QGC says it's naturally occurring because its wells are not operational. The government has done 3 reports on this bore and concluded it's safe and not flammable. A finding Brian Monk finds absurd.
We're going to basically light the unlightable gas. The evidence now is everywhere. You can walk around our property, put a pick in the ground and read methane.
The evidence of large-scale methane seepage from gas wells and pipes is starting to gain a scientific basis. At this muddy campsite on the edge of the Tara gas fields, these scientists from the Southern Cross University are challenging the notion that CSG is cleaner and greener than other fossil fuels.
The gas wells are the crosses over there.
This is kind of the first independent data that's been collected in Australian coal seam gas fields. And despite them being operated for, a number of years, this research hasn't been undertaken yet, so it is very preliminary, but at least we're starting to bring some data to the table.
Drive very slowly, make sure we can pick up those hot spots.
They've already released research that has found the level of methane in the air is up to 3 times higher than areas without coal seam gas.
What the petroleum industry does do is look for methane seeps to help it identify where the coal seam gas is and where there may be shallow coal. This is well before any activity of coal seam gas. So I'm not surprised to see the variations at all, but I think the Southern Cross University paper was fundamentally flawed and the peer review showed that.
But it's basic research that the gas companies and the government have failed to do. So they've come back to do more research and have fitted their car with a unique spectrometer that can take measurements every second.
We're sampling the gas from the front of the vehicle as we drive. It comes into our instrument here and we can monitor the concentrations of methane, carbon dioxide and also the carbon stable isotope value, which is like a chemical fingerprint of those gases. So this is hooked up to our GPS.
They match the readings to the gas wells and pipelines accurately with a global positioning system.
So that's for the state of Queensland.
The industry has always maintained that gas leakage is negligible, but that's not what the scientists are finding. They're heading into the middle of QGC's Kenya gas field.
So the concentrations have kind of increased from about 1.76 up to around 1.8, even though it's kind of quite windy and starting to rain outside, which tends to mix up the atmosphere a bit more.
After we drive through, we stop to review the data.
We've picked up a number of sources, so we see the methane kind of pop up and down as we pass some of the wells. Right at the moment it's slightly elevated, which indicates we've got a nearby source of methane.
The scientists say it's critical to work right through the night. They get their highest readings because it's usually cooler and less windy.
The concentrations are going up pretty sharply now, up about 100 parts per billion. It's a very detectable signal.
They say their work demonstrates the urgent need for comprehensive baseline surveys to be done.
There is a leakage here clearly. The concentrations are clearly going up very sharply, so it's a hot spot definitely.
The scientists have also been collecting radon samples at 5 locations. Radon is a naturally occurring gas found in the soil that can act as a tracer for the leaking methane and other gases.
Alright, it's looking great. No water, no animals, all the information seems to be here. Concentrations are going up and down through the night.
In a separate peer-reviewed study just released, the scientists say the radon has provided more evidence that leaking methane is coming from the soil around the coal seam gas wells.
We have found significant correlations between the radon concentrations in the atmosphere and the number of nearby wells. So that makes us believe that the wells are related to these enhanced concentrations.
If this research proves to be correct and more methane is being released into the atmosphere, it could be a game changer for the coal seam gas industry. It could make the greenhouse footprint for CSG much higher than oil or coal. And if the carbon tax is imposed on this, then that could undermine future profits. The industry rejects this. but acknowledges further research needs to be done.
The CSIRO have done a report. They say there's no baseline study. They're calling for baseline study.
I'm not surprised that anyone would call for additional science, additional technology. There's always researchers who are calling for that, and we would welcome that. We've got nothing to hide.
All of this raises some basic but fundamental questions about whether proper baseline studies have been done on the water table and environmental impacts. Which leads to another important question. Why has the coal seam gas industry been allowed to proceed at such a rapid pace? Tonight, Four Corners can reveal why. Simone Marsh played a critical role in the approval process of Australia's largest coal seam gas developments, Santos's $18 billion project and QGC's $20 billion project in southern Queensland. She was a key insider, and she's telling her story for the first time.
I think the truth is that it's not an ecologically sustainable activity. Obviously they didn't want to say that. They wanted approval to come in and conduct that activity. They didn't want anyone to understand what the long-term impacts were going to be and the long-term costs associated with this activity.
Four Corners asked Santos and QGC for an on-camera interview, but they declined. Rick Wilkinson is the industry spokesperson.
I think it's right and proper that there should be whistleblowers, and if something's not right, then they should raise it. But I'm confident from what I've seen that the right processes were followed, and there were many checks and balances on the way through.
Simone Marsh's job for the first half of 2010 in the Queensland Department of Infrastructure and Planning was to assess the environmental impact of these massive billion-dollar Santos and QGC developments. They were deemed state-significant projects to be overseen by Queensland's Coordinator General.
It was an impossible task. Firstly, the information wasn't there, so you can't do an assessment without the basic site information, the baseline studies, and an understanding of where the infrastructure was going to be laid out and which environmentally sensitive areas were going to be impacted.
This is a remarkable claim, but it's backed up by 900 pages of documents obtained by Four Corners through the Right to Information legislation in Queensland. The documents detail an approval process that was rushed, made with insufficient information, and put commercial considerations above environmental ones. Simone Marsh's first task was to assess the Santos project. She was surprised to find only a concept, with little hard data on where the wells or pipelines were going or potential environmental impacts.
It was quite frightening that they would consider approving such a project without the basic information that a normal mining project would have been asked to submit, given that this was like 600 times the size of your standard large mine. And for a large mine, you would normally have the boundaries clearly articulated. You would have done all the baseline studies beforehand.
In particular, Simone was shocked that no assessment was going to be done on the impacts to groundwater for the Santos project.
I was taken into a meeting room, sat down and told that there wasn't going to be a chapter on groundwater. And I was stunned. I said, "What are you talking about? What do you mean there's not going to be a chapter on groundwater? It's one of the biggest issues for the project." And he just repeated the words that there was not going to be a groundwater chapter in the Santos Coordinator General's report, and wouldn't give me any reason why, or why not.
But a document from the 4th of May 2010 offers some explanation. It's a brief sent by the Department of Planning and Infrastructure to the Coordinator General. It states, As advised previously, not all the usual information is available. And goes on. This has been difficult and uncertain without the full suite of information normally available. We are mindful of the Coordinator General's report being able to provide a bankable outcome.
They're after a bankable outcome, which is not anything to do with an environmental impact assessment process. They basically just want an approval. That's all they want, is an approval with some conditions that the companies can live with.
When Simone Marsh learnt the timeframes for the Santos assessments were going to be cut short, she decided to act and wrote this email to her superiors listing 26 concerns.
I wrote that email to make sure that the Deputies Coordinator Generals, the Assistant Coordinator Generals and the Project Directors were aware that the information I had been preparing and that I had been drafting and sending through to the Project Directors was not making it into the final report, and that key information that and conclusions that I had drawn from the material that I could access was being altered or ignored, and that the proponents themselves were having a large role in dictating the information that went into the report and into the conditions as well.
3 days before the Santos report was due, Simone made one last attempt with this document to warn about the potential damage to the water table. The next day, there was this response. I have significant concerns with the words proposed, Simone. On the 28th of May, the Coordinator General at the time, Colin delivered his report on the Santos project. There was no groundwater assessment, only half a page dealing with policy and legislation. But surprisingly, the Coordinator General said he was not convinced there was sufficient detail to determine impacts on environmental values. After reviewing Santos's environmental impact statement and its supplementary, the Coordinator General called on Santos to provide 10 key reports, including comprehensive water management plans for the next phase of approval. Rick Wilkinson was head of the Santos LNG coal seam gas unit at the time and says the reports were submitted.
Santos didn't provide fundamental data to make those assessments.
They did provide the fundamental data. I disagree with that statement very strongly.
So you're disagreeing with the Coordinator General, are you?
At that particular point, he can raise questions about what data, further data he needs. The supplemental addresses those particular issues, and then he has many options to condition the data so that if the data is not provided to his satisfaction, the EIS is not approved, you can't go on to the next step.
Simone Marsh was not the only public servant under pressure. The right to information documents show her colleagues also did not have enough data or the time to make proper assessments. This document dated May 4th. We were given less than 4 weeks to deal with 10,000 pages of documents. Once again, I'm faced with a physically impossible request. Or this one that simply states under pressure. But that pressure was about to be ramped up. Simone was now going to assess Queensland Gas Company's, or QGC's, $20 billion project.
We're only given a matter of days to prepare conditions for that report. We were actually not given any time to do any reading or assessment of the material. We were just instructed to write conditions for QGC. Which is, again, unbelievably bad.
I'd be very surprised that's the case. We provide the data to the government, to the bureaucracy. How they manage their internal workings is their business. I'd be very surprised if there's any justification behind that.
So there was no pressure from the industry, is that what you're saying?
I'm not aware of any pressure other than to provide the data which we had to provide to them and meet their timelines.
The final straw for Simone Marsh came when she was instructed to write the greenhouse gas assessment for the QGC project in half a day. It was a brief with complex calculations and projections.
I had tears rolling down my cheeks at work that day. I remember that day very clearly because I'd never actually cried at work before. And I finished, the project director said to me, just do what you can, and that's what I did. And I packed up all my belongings at the end of that day that I could carry, left materials in the drawers, and I didn't go back.
Simone Marsh has been on stress leave since. Two of her supervisors are now working with the coal seam gas industry. Chris McGrath is a barrister who's represented all sides in planning and development cases. He's assessed the right to information documents and says both the Santos and the QGC coordinated general reports could be tested in court.
For him to sign off on this project, in my view, was a bad decision, a flawed decision, but you can still have, it can still be lawful.
He says there's a fundamental conflict of interest in the approval process when the Coordinator General's office becomes involved.
The Coordinator General's main aim is the economic development of the state. And don't get me wrong, it's fine for components of government for that to be their, a major concern or their drive. That's fine. But you shouldn't also put them in charge of the environmental impact assessment process. That should be separated out so that you try and have some independence.
I think it's a balance between economic growth and sustainable development. When you look around towns like Roma and Chinchilla, Miles, Dalby, those places are getting new families moving in, infrastructure, new airports. The unemployment rate in Dalby, according to the mayor there, is below 2%.
When it came time for the federal government to assess the projects, Tony Burke, the Minister for Environment, got the Santos and QGC projects independently examined by Geoscience Australia. It found that parts of the company's environmental impact statements were insufficient or inadequate.
There was no moment more significant than the direct briefing that I had in my office with Geoscience Australia.
And what did they say to you?
Well, it was the opposite of what the companies had said. So some of the companies had said to me that there was no connectivity, that each aquifer itself was watertight. And the information that came from Geoscience Australia was essentially, they said, we're not sure. There might be, and if there is, then you have a very significant potential impact.
This project is good for the environment, good for people, and good for Australia.
With further conditions, the QGC and Santos projects were approved.
We have binding commitments with LNG customers.
QGC, supported by the federal government, announced the project was the single biggest investment ever made by its British owners.
We estimate that the project will increase economic activity in Queensland by 32 billion Australian dollars.
But there's much more to Simone Marsh's story. She has boxes of other documents she will take to Queensland's top crime-fighting body, the Crime and Misconduct Commission. She's received support from Campbell Newman, the Premier of Queensland, who also wants an investigation. Queensland is not alone in the rush to develop coal seam gas. The New South Wales government says by 2025, CSG could contribute $1 billion to the economy, with about 3,000 wells planned. But the same lack of baseline data is an issue. On the the edge of Sydney's suburban sprawl, near Camden, AGL has a gas field of 89 wells. About 80% of them have been fracked, and it's been in production for more than a decade. The project runs along the Nepean River. John Ponsonby has been fishing in this part of the river since he was a kid.
I've got to say, I really enjoy the solitude of it. You can hear the bellbirds in the background, and very often there's a sea eagle that nests in that tree up there. So it's just a really beautiful environment, and I just love it. And you can come down here with the dirts on the world and go home as happy as a lark.
When the wells were fracked, John noticed the river would suddenly rise and fall, bubble with gas, and fish would disappear. AGL says it's a natural occurrence.
I'm concerned really from the health aspects of it. I just think it's disgraceful that governments can agree to foster this on people with absolute stealth, no consultation.
Scientist Dr. Gavin Mudd did a study into AGL's environmental record and discovered there's been no monitoring of the water table for a decade.
If the statutory obligations don't require groundwater monitoring, then all AGL can say with respect to the groundwater is they have no data. They can't say there's impact, they can't say there's no impact, there's no data. So in that sense, that's a big deficiency.
AGL maintains its operations are safe and says it doesn't need to monitor the water table because there is little risk.
Sure, the risks may be minimal, but if that's true, then drill some groundwater bores, get good data and prove that. It's not hard, straightforward. We know how to do that, but we need good data to basically prove that there's no impact. We can't have no data and then turn around and say there's no impact.
The community was outraged when AGL revealed late last year that it had failed to continuously monitor air emissions from its gas plants.
Or they wanted to make it look like...
The residents were worried about the release of toxic gases.
You should see what the others are like. This is a system that's supposed to have checks and balances, and yet they were in breach for 4 years without a single authority picking it up. It wasn't picked up in the so-called independent external audits. It wasn't picked up by any of the agencies, any of the government departments that were supposed to be monitoring.
AGL says it was a minor licence breach, but an internal Environment Protection Authority brief obtained by Four Corners says it was a serious matter because it undermines community confidence in the industry. Despite this, AGL has asked the EPA to review the need to continuously monitor air emissions because of the considerable costs involved.
In that way, we have to understand.
So when AGL proposed to expand its operations with 66 new wells and frack them under the streets and houses of southwest Sydney, there was open revolt.
Some of that was released.
AGL fronted up at community forums to tell their side of the story.
What I don't want to see is coal seam gas mining going ahead now and in 40 years' time finding out it's this generation's asbestos. That's my point of view.
We know it's not toxic. We have that information. That information is available. It has to comply with Australian standards.
After 11 years of operation, AGL has announced it will monitor the water table, air emissions and leaking or fugitive gas.
The last thing I want to be associated with is an industry that's going to be toxic or poison. It's just not that. And it's up to us. We have to communicate this to the community. So you get a high level of confidence. And I don't expect for a minute that we're going to be able to change everybody's mind, but at least we can get the facts out there. And
AGL said there would be no impact, but the residents don't believe them.
Why don't we have the right as residents to demand that this doesn't happen? Why not go to a remote area? I do not want mining under my home or any people's homes in this area. How do we demand it? I don't care about inquiring. I just want to say no.
Where is Barry? Where is Barry? Where is
face of losing support in 4 key electorates, New South Wales Premier Barry O'Farrell responded.
Madam Speaker.
He declared a 2-kilometre exclusion zone for coal seam gas around residential areas. He also announced an independent review of all CSG activities.
We put together the toughest regulatory regime in the country, and today we've added to it by making it even tougher to inject some common sense alongside the science.
The new regulation effectively put an end to AGL's plans. But not every community has been a winner. About 320 kilometres north, in the New South Wales rural town of Gloucester, the locals are warming up for a fight.
Support that's here today, it gives me...
Hundreds have packed into a local hall to hear the latest on AGL's moves to build at least 110 wells, plus a spiderweb of roads and pipes across the landscape. It's due to begin production in 2016.
We're sitting on the edge here.
The New South Wales government's new restrictions provide little comfort here. The impending development isn't included because it's already been approved.
My feelings towards this. Gloucester is not included, or any other small village of less than 1,000 people in any rural area are going to be treated as second-class citizens. I believe, where's the fairness in that?
As a local mayor, John Rosenbaum feels a special obligation to try and protect the valley he's called home for 40 years. He is worried about the cumulative impacts of potentially hundreds of coal seam gas wells, plus 2 new coal mining proposals.
That's what this area is looking at, an industrialisation of our valley. That's the real outcome of all this in the future if it's allowed to grow, with the possibilities of damage to our natural beauty.
The uncertainty of the long-term impacts of coal seam gas has already had a deeply personal effect on John and his wife Diana.
Sure you're going to keep all these books?
Yes, they all have memories. They're all full of memories.
The couple have recently moved from their family farm of 40 years after selling their land to a mining company.
All was 40 months together.
The dreams were to build a new home, and then, of course, the industry came along, and that's a whole new ball game for us. There's all the farm. After the properties were sold around us, the coal seam gas actually developed at the back of our farm. The first exploration wells, I've been living this for nearly 8 years. Just got too much. So we walked away.
And that still haunts you, though?
Yeah, oh yes, yeah, it will. For a long time.
Tell me why.
The memories. My children. I'm sorry.
It's okay.
The emotional turmoil that's accompanied the arrival of coal seam gas isn't confined to farmers.
So Gloucester is surrounded by state forests and national parks, and very cold in the winter.
And isn't it sad that they're going to try and mine? It is sad, isn't it? Really, really sad. They're terribly wrong.
Yes. So what I'm going to do now is pass some thyme honey and some paddle pop sticks around.
Karen O'Brien runs a herb farm and welcomes 150 busloads of tourists each year.
I don't need to say this, but please don't double dip, okay?
She says if the tranquility and beauty of the area is put under threat, so too is the region's $30 million tourism industry.
Which again is a mild relaxant.
They put 4 pilot wells in, and I had to ring every day about the noise of the trucks.
I had a few coach drivers who told me that I would have to go, instead of talking personally to them, I would have to get a microphone. I would have to amplify my voice. I'm also concerned if we have that amount of movements of trucks, will anyone want to come here with that noise surrounding them?
AGL says its track record shows it can comfortably coexist with other land users without harm to the environment or to human health. It's not only locals concerned about the possible detrimental effects. Professor Philip Pells has worked as a consultant for the mining industry for 40 years, but he says he's never seen anything like the groundwater study underpinning the AGL project.
I don't think I've ever seen something drawing such broad-ranging and significant conclusions on such a limited amount of information and with no numerical modelling. I've never seen it.
Professor Pearl's main concern is the project's potential impact on the groundwater system. Gloucester is different from other coal seam gas regions. What is beneath the ground in one patch of land is completely different in the next. So a study of the entire area is needed. But again, it hasn't been done.
It's a very complicated geology, and therefore it's very difficult to get an accurate picture of the geology and what controls the groundwater systems.
Professor Pells has studied AGL's report, which found there was no evidence of natural connectivity or movement between shallow and deep groundwater systems.
If we let it run again...
He ran the numbers through his own computer. The data indicated that even after 1 year, there could be impacts to groundwater, which could diminish base flows to the rivers, particularly in times of drought.
In a farmer's bore up there, it would now have no water in it.
After 10 years, the impacts could be substantial.
The groundwater system has now been substantially depressurised. We took their conceptual model exactly how they presented it, with their geometry, with their parameters, and we put it in standard software that you can buy from the US of A or anywhere you like, and we ran the model. And it simply shows that they are connected. I'm just disappointed that a conclusion was reached which clearly isn't supported by their own model. The big issue is that the groundwater regime feeds into the rivers. If that water is now going downwards in a downwards direction towards depressurisation, then it's not feeding the rivers. So we're losing base flow to the rivers, and that's the big ticket item.
But it's not only the quantity of water flowing in the nearby rivers that is of concern. It's the quality too. The gas project is located in the Manning District drinking water catchment area, a source of water for 75,000 people downstream.
The risks are that we have a catastrophic failure associated with this development, and that essentially knocks out our water supply system, even temporarily, in the local area, and we find ourselves in a position where we can't supply water to our 75,000 people who rely on us. That's the potential risk.
Alec Hoggett is the chairman of Mid Coast Water, which supplies drinking water to residents in the Gloucester, Greater Taree and Great Lakes areas in New South Wales. Mid Coast Water wasn't consulted before the New South Wales government approved the AGL project in February 2011. AGL and the New South Wales Planning Department both say there is no risk because the drinking water is sourced more than 40 kilometres downstream.
For us to be included so late in the process, and for that absolutely critical issue of catchment management and drinking water supply to be completely overlooked, I'd suggest that's probably a fairly serious failure of the process.
About 70 kilometres downstream at Mount George, the Manning River is the heart of Ken Squire's pristine beef farm. The farm survives on the clean water he pumps directly from the river into his cattle troughs and house tank.
The importance of this river is unsurpassed for us because it's our lifeblood. We actually rely on water out of this river every day. We can take it to our house, we can take it to our storage tank at the old bales. If our river gets polluted, there's no option for us but to say ta-ta to our livestock. We've just got to give it up, we've got to get out of here.
Like many in the area and others battling coal seam gas across the country, Ken Squires feels let down by governments and their planning processes that has let an industry proceed without sufficient assessment. While others have walked away, Ken Squires says he won't be giving up without a fight.
I have no doubt whatsoever that the government and AGL, if AGL is the company that comes through here, will have a ridge-to-ridge fight on their hands. There's no doubt in the world about that. We just don't want it. It is unacceptable. And why should a farm such as this one be devastated by people who just want nothing but their own interest? They just want their money, what they can get, and then when it's done, they're gone.
One of those sticky issues that isn't just going to fade away. We did invite QGC, Santos and AGL to participate in this program, as well as the Queensland Government. All declined an on-camera interview. The three companies have provided written responses which are on our website. Next week on Four Corners, an evocative and powerful story about